Okay, we're gonna play a little more of Iwaihime. Or should I call it Noroi Hime? As we found out in the last episode that Noroi was the original title for the shrine in Iwaihime. But now it's become, it was Noroi Moto, and now it's become Iwaimoto to mean celebration, but it really means curse. After the curse of the soot that fell on the town years ago, I assume on the town, it was the hillside that's most likely in the town that they're in right now, in the shrine that Kurakami is at. Toei Kurakami is most likely the Noroi shrine, the site of it. The god that they worshipped, they thought that the god could control the rain, but the god in fact could not. What the god could control was sustenance and the deer that are in the area. The god sent a few deer to the villagers. This is way back when, 1,000 years ago. And they proceeded to eat the deer they got, which was fine, but then they craved more money and more meat, and the jealousy of humans and the greed of humans ultimately was their demise, as all they had to do was not kill the last deer, and they would have been okay, but they killed every single one, including the children. And so the last deer had the spirit of whatever her name is. The title of this video is going to be her name. It had the spirit of that goddess in it, and when they killed it, she decided to release a plume of soot. It cursed the area. They would not be able to yield any crops. It would kill all the crops, and every covered every animal and everything in the area, so they would starve to death. But if they sacrifice somebody, they can, with the dark arts, get them to ingest the entire curse into their body. But this sacrifice will need to be continued for God knows how long, as these, as the person gets closer to death. Basically, people can live like 24 to 30 years, so they've got to have a kid before they die. And in this story, of course, you can't have kids until you're like 18. That's the story in this one. So
So
yeah, they'll have to birth another son or daughter, because if they don't, the curse will stay inside them, and it will spew out and infect the whole town again. It'll basically spread over the town. So the rule is that whoever is the firstborn of this person will have this disease in them, the black curse, and then they'll have to have a kid, and their kid will have to have a kid, and so on and so forth, to keep the curse contained inside a human vessel instead of spreading it across the area. So that's the deal. Unfortunately, of course, it would make more sense to put the curse in some old body, but they needed it to be somebody young enough that they could have a kid. And I think it's also, that is a major deal, but I think if it went into an old person, they'd just like die immediately. The curse, wears on your body, so it cuts your life in like to 1/3 of what it should be. The other major thing that happened was Toei Kurakami, her doll was shattered by what's his face, her boyfriend Shokun, and Sho proceeded to die to Toei Kurakami in the last episode. So if you wanna watch that, you can go back and watch it. I'm assuming he'll live in the final route. This is probably the teacher's route, or it's a failed Kurakami route. Because I doubt Sho is going to die in the final route. Like, he's a jerk and all, but I don't know. Maybe. But all of his friends died too. It doesn't seem like making Toei a murderer is a good way to end a route. End the final route. So let's see. They won't die. They'll just bear the entirety of the curse in their body.
同じことじゃ。それに、代々呪われた子を産み続けなければならないんじゃろ。
It's all the same. Besides, the family needs to have a child to bear the curse each generation after that, right?
そんなの絶対にごめんじゃぞ。
I'd be damned if I had to go through with that. The spell to seal the cursed soot into his sacrifice. The mayor had gathered several of the elders and engaged them in an unproductive discussion about who the target would be. They had to choose a sacrifice, but it wouldn't end with the sacrifice. In order to keep the curse sealed, they'd need a child to bear the curse and raise them. A cycle that would go on for all eternity.
もちろん、村を救うための人柱となるのじゃ。村を挙げて支え、感謝するぞ。
The village will honor their sacrifice and gratitude, of course. We will all give them our support and gratitude. On the surface, the sacrifice would be praised as the hero who saved the village. But in reality, there was no way any village would willingly interact with the clan of someone bearing such an ominous curse. So no one wanted to step up to the task, not when it meant condemning their family to eternal damnation in every sense of the word. But the whole village would be destroyed if they didn't choose a sacrifice and perform the ritual. Unlike the present, this wasn't an era where people were free to choose where they lived. Excuse me. Now that the land was cursed, they had nowhere to run. Yeah, they can't go to another village because the villagers won't accept a bunch of, stragglers, especially if they find out that they came from a cursed village. They're definitely not going to take them in. But they don't take other people in. They're needy. Villages in this era are needy enough. They don't have the resources or the food to support another person.
すす封じの儀式は明日の朝に執り行わねば間に合わぬそうじゃ。
If we don't perform the ritual to seal the soot, it'll be too late by tomorrow.
何としても選び出さねばならぬぞ。
We must come to a decision now.
どうしても決まらぬというならば、くじで決めざるを得んが。
If we don't decide, we have to draw lots.
そうじゃ。妙案がある。
Hey, I have an idea. If it doesn't involve you giving up your firstborn, it's not a good idea. How about that Azusa priestess? Everyone looked at each other with surprise.
儀式のやり方は分かっとるんじゃろ。
You know how to perform the ritual, don't you?
別にあずさみ子がおらんでも儀式はできるはずじゃ。
So we don't actually need her to carry it out, do we?
おお、そうじゃ。儀式をするのにあのあずさみ子は必要ない。
Yes, that's actually right. She's not needed to carry out the ritual itself. Suzunome was an outsider. She had no family. What's more, Suzunome met all the conditions for the sacrifice, and as an Azusa priestess or Azura priestess, she fit the bill perfectly.
それでよいな、皆の衆。
This jerk. We all in agreement? Everybody nodded. Except you. Unbeknownst to them, Mutsu heard the entire thing. He and Suzunome had been preparing to bury the old woman when he'd been struck by a sense of dread. As it turned out, his foreboding had been well-founded.
Suzunome, 逃げるな。
Suzunome, you gotta run. Suzunome blinked in surprise, but Mutsu just grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to her feet.
何事ですか？痛いです。話してください。
What are you doing? You're hurting me. Let me go.
後で話す。今は黙って走るんだ。
I'll explain later. You just run. The villagers couldn't understand why the pair went running. But their confusion turned to rage after the mayor spoke.
その女を逃がすな！捕まえるのじゃ！
Don't let that woman escape. Capture her.
何事かわかりません。
I don't understand. What's happening?
あいつら、
君を生贄にするつもりだ。
They want to make you the sacrifice.
女子連れじゃそうは遠くに行けんはず。
He's running with a woman. They won't get far.
隠れて夜を待つつもりに違いない。探すのじゃ。
They must be planning to lie hidden until nightfall. Find him. Though Susanome was used to traveling, she had little chance of escaping several men in the prime of their life. Her only chance was to hide now and flee under the cover of night. But the men knew the mountain just as well as Mutsu.
なんとしてもあのあずさみ子を捕らえるのじゃ。
Capture the priestess, no matter what it takes.
今日中に捕らえ明朝の儀式の生贄とせねば村は滅ぶぞ。
The village will be destroyed unless we capture her and sacrifice her by tomorrow morning. No, it won't. You'll be able to sacrifice anybody else in the village.
あずさみ子を捕まえろ。生贄にするのじゃ。
Capture the priestess. She must be sacrificed.
生贄は命があればよい。抵抗するなら腕の一本や二本へし折っても構わぬ。
All that matters is that she be taken in alive. You can break an arm or two if you need to.
女の足じゃ逃げ切れるわけがない。
A woman can't get far on foot. We'll find her.
おそらくどこかに隠れているんじゃ。
She must be hiding.
ここいらにはおらんな。向こうを探すぞ。
She's not here. Check over there.
今だ。こっちへ。
This is our chance. Let's go. I hope she doesn't make a
今
mistake.
藪の向こうで音が聞こえたぞ。
I heard something in the thicket just now. Yeah, I hope it's just they catch up to them.
おい、そこにいるか。
Come on out.
アホ、わしらじゃこっちにはおらんぞ。
It's just us, you fools. She's not here.
言ったようだね。
Looks like they're gone.
今のうちに行こう。峠の向こうは森が深い。そこに明日まで身を潜めているんだ。
The forest is thick past the ridge. We can hide until tomorrow there. We have to flee now.
生贄の儀式とやらは明日の朝に必要なんだからね。
The ritual needs to be carried out by tomorrow morning.
それまで身を潜めていれば鈴の目を追う理由はなくなるはず。
If we avoid their clutches until then, they'll have no more reason to chase you.
でもそれでは村が六神様の呪いに。
But then the village will be destroyed by Lord Rokugami's curse. No, they'll just sacrifice somebody else.
どうしても生贄が見つからないならその時は僕が生贄になるよ。
If they haven't found a sacrifice by then, I'll just offer myself up.
そんな、どうしてムツが。
No way. Why would it be you, Mutsu?
これは彼らの六神様のお山を犯した者たちの罪ではありませんか。
They're the ones that sinned by desecrating Lord Rokugami's mountain.
それに最初から反対していたムツが生贄になることなどありませぬ。
Besides, you were against this plan from the very start. Why should you be the sacrifice?
生贄になったって死ぬわけじゃないんでしょ。
Being sacrificed does not mean dying.
本来は村全体が被るべき呪いを一人で背負うのですよ。
But you'll have to bear a curse that was meant for a whole village.
死には至らなくともどれほどの苦しみになるか想像も。
And you go through untold suffering until you die.
でも誰かが引き受けなくちゃならない。
Even so, somebody's gotta do it.
今はみんな冷静じゃないけれど本当はとても優しい人たちばかりなんだ。
They may not be in the right minds right now, but the people of this village are kind at heart. Yeah, right.
こんな目にあって鈴の目には信じられないかもしれないけど本当はすごくいい村なんだよ。
I know you might find it hard to believe after all this, but it's really a great village.
なのに君にこんな仕打ちをするなんて。
And yet they just turned on you like that.
僕は
I hate this.
悔しい。 おい、あそこにおったぞ。
Hey, they're over here.
ま
Damn
ずい
it.
走るんだ。
This is bad. Run.
おっ、
どこじゃどこじゃ。
There they are.
ああ、いたぞ。あそこだ。
Where? Ah, they're over there. Men with bloodshot eyes rushed out of the thicket one after the next. Susanome already out of breath. Escape was impossible.
君は走って僕は食い止める。
We have not heard this soundtrack. I'm gonna turn it up. I assume this is like the... You know, they're using it this late in the game. I'm sure we'll hear it more. This is probably like when the intense action slash dramatic moment where characters take action kind of music. Of course it's being used right now just for running, but I bet you it'll be used again later. Keep running, I'll hold him off.
振り返らないで。さよなら、鈴の目。
Don't turn back. Sayonara, Suzunome. Neither wanted this to be how they parted. But that was exactly why Suzunome couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't let Mutsu's final act of chivalry go to waste. So all she could do was pray for his safety as she ran. Mutsu was kind by nature, but he would fight for his life if needed. The men came charging at him full speed once they saw him. Yet much to their surprise, Mutsu threw one into a thicket. Apparently they hadn't expected the cornered rat to fight back. Mutsu, have you lost your mind? Why don't we ask you the same thing? Exactly, you should be asking yourselves that. Have you no shame? First, you have the gall to desecrate the mountain, and then you have the gall to repay their lady priestess's kindness with betrayal. Ignore this man. Find the woman. Not on my watch. Let me go, you fool. Never. I will never let you have her. Run. Run for your life, Suzunome. Suzunome pushed through the thicket and descended the slope as Mutsu's voice echoed around her. Oh no. But she tripped and fell to the ground. Oh, I told you, I didn't want her to make a mistake and that be why she gets caught and killed. I just wanted it to be they caught up to her, but of course she has to trip and fall. She twisted her ankle. Suzunome got up and limped away like a newborn fawn. However, there was no way she could run in that condition. The villagers' shouts grew closer and closer as they rushed through the thicket. All she could do was pray and hide in the thicket. Please, don't find me. Keep Mutsu safe. Parting like this is far too tragic. I found the priestess. Oh well. Nuts. The village youths were on the grounds of the abandoned temple, rolling the temple's bell in unison to prepare for the ritual. The soot sailing spell required a giant metal cauldron. They would sail the sacrifice and the soot they gathered from the village into the cauldron for 3 days and 3 nights until the sacrifice had absorbed all the soot inside. The village had no giant cauldron, so the temple's bronze hanging bell was the perfect substitute. It would be tilted over part way and held up by logs, an arrangement often used in animal traps. Once the sacrifice and the soot were put through the gap, the logs would be removed, sealing them both inside the bell. Suzunome stood in front of the bell with her hands tied behind her back, as though she were a common thief, listening to the mayor with a detached expression. Yeah, F you. It pains me to be so rough with you. Truly, it does. No. So please, we ask that you offer up your body to save the village. I say no! What do you say to that? Is Mutsu alright? I can't see him anywhere. He opposed the villagers' decision. It would not be surprising if they killed him. He fought to give me a chance to escape. I hope he's alive. Those thoughts were all that occupied Suzunome's mind. The ritual preparations before her felt so far away.
生涯丁重に扱うと約束する。
We will treat you with utmost respect in exchange for taking in the village's curse. You have my word. Your word is not good. You literally ate all those deer, even though you promised you would never go into the mountains. Who cares about your word?
だから頼む。どうか生贄を引き受けてくださらんか。
Thus we beseech you, will you become our sacrifice? No. Suzunome didn't answer. She simply continued spacing out, giving no indication as to whether she'd heard a single word. The mayor rose to his feet and whispered into her ear.
お前さんがどうしても引き受けてくれないというなら
Do you intend to reject my offer?
仕方がない。陸奥にその役目を頼むほかはないの。
So weird that I suppose we have no choice but to ask Mutsu. No. Mayor didn't overlook Suzunome's reaction. He was already aware of the relationship, so he decided to take full advantage of it.
生贄は子に呪いを引き継がねばならぬ。ならば、陸奥と夫婦になればよかろう。
The sacrifice must pass the curse on to their child. Thus, I would have no qualms in permitting your marriage to Mutsu.
生贄になってくれれば、村はあんたを生涯敬う。
If you accept, the village...
生涯を過ごせる。
Excuse me. If you accept, the village will honor you for the rest of your life, and you can spend your remaining years with Mutsu. He talks very, very, very... I know he's whispering, but... He talks extremely softly. There's no way to make it louder. That's as loud as it goes. That's too bad.
本来なら、陸奥は村の裏切り者。許されぬ罪じゃ。
Mutsu is a traitor to the village. Normally he would pay dearly for his crime.
だが、あんたが生贄を引き受けてくれれば、それを許してやってもいい。
Should you undertake the role of sacrifice, I'm willing to pardon Mutsu.
わかりました。
Very well. I shall become the village's sacrifice.
おお。
秘術の生贄をお引き受けいたしまする。
She wept, and she raised her head and looked the mayor in the eye and told him, Yep, I'll be your sacrifice.
ですから、
Spare Mutsu.
どうか、陸奥の罪だけはお許しください。
Kudasai. Mutsu finally regained consciousness to the sensation of an insect tickling his nose. He was lying in a grove on a steep slope. He'd fallen down said slope while grappling one of Suzunome's pursuers. Then he hit his head on something passed out. Suzunome, the air was still. Mutsu couldn't find anyone nearby, no matter how hard he strained his ears. His stomach turned with a horrible sense of dread. If Suzunome had still been hiding, the villagers would still be combing the mountain, and they would have questioned Mutsu on her whereabouts, yet they'd left him alone. He got to his feet, ignoring the aching through his body. When he cleared the woods, the abandoned temple on the opposite side came into view. Mutsu could see a large crowd gathering there. Meanwhile, the soot-gathering ritual, which would seal the cursed soot into Suzunome, had begun. As per tradition, the sacrifice would cleanse herself with divine sake and salt. Next, she would part with the gods, and spirits protected her, rinsing herself of right and wrong alike. Once her body was spiritually pure, she would smear the soot swept up from the village all over her. Stark naked amidst the watching villagers, Suzunome plastered the soot that had blanketed the mountainside across her body. Her porcelain skin was stained black with the cursed soot, yet somehow it was absorbed into her body and faded in moments. The men observed from a distance. At first they'd been staring scandalously at her, but now they were all seized with tension. Eventually all the soot was gone. Her whole body had absorbed the curse like a sponge. And finally, they reached the last step. She would be sealed into the bell for 3 days and 3 nights, in order to seal the curse into her body permanently. Suzunome nodded to the mayor to let him know she was ready. The mayor nodded back and gestured toward the bell. Suzunome slowly gazed up at the sky and took one last look at the picturesque scenery of the mountaintop. Once my body fully takes in this curse, how will the world change? How will this beautiful world look to these cursed eyes? I can tell this is the last time. The wind will feel so pleasant, the air smells so fragrant, the sky gleams so blue. But if it means saving Mutsu and protecting the village he holds so dear, then I shall go through with this and say farewell to my final attachments to this life. Suzunome entered the bell and sat down. She closed her eyes and concentrated. Before long, her sense of sight and hearing were completely sealed. Amidst the silent world, Suzunome quietly gave in to her fate.
Yosh. 釣り鐘をかぶせるのじゃ.
Alright, lower the bell. The men slowly approached the bell with axes in hands. Once they cut the logs holding the bell up, Suzunome would be sailed underneath it. Wait. Mutsu rushed into the temple grounds. Panicking, the mayor urged the men to sail the sacrifice away before it was too late. I'll save you, Suzunome. But his cries failed to reach the woman, who had accepted her fate and closed off her heart. A group of nearby men rushed Mutsu in an attempt to hold him back. Out of my way, I won't let you stop me. I really would love if Mutsu can get this guy. I don't care if he's an old guy. Just get this guy. I don't care about anybody else. Pin him down. Kill him if you have to. Mutsu tossed the men grappling with him, one after the other, his face a mask of demonic fury. Though the number far outnumbered him, the men faltered at his feats of superhuman strength. His blows had knocked out their front teeth, leaving them clutching their wrists and groaning as they writhed about. Onija! Onija! It's a demon! Don't falter, just lower the bell. The men grappling Mutsu were tossed back. Everyone knew Mutsu boasted of his strength, but his power at this moment was beyond their wildest imaginings. The adrenaline was all it took to overpower the men. Nothing could stand in Mutsu's way, nothing but the giant bell they were trying to sail Suzunome on. Uh-oh. But in a cruel twist of fate, the bell hit the ground and shook the earth with a heavy roar, trapping Suzunome inside. Yet Mutsu's charge could not be stopped. In fact, his legs started hitting the ground, harder and faster. He put all his might into his toes and kicked off the ground, so intensely it nearly shattered beneath him. After that, he entrusted his fist, with his whole desire to save Suzunome. And with a thunderous howl, he swung that fist with his very heart and soul. And, unfortunately, it didn't break the bell. Everyone around heard the crack of the sky being torn asunder. That sound, Mutsu's hand striking the bell. Could he truly break through the giant mass of bronze with his bare fist? Could a miracle truly unfold? Unfortunately, no. No one would have been surprised if it did indeed shatter. That was a testament to the drive behind Mutsu's punch. Mutsu fell to his knees. He gripped his trembling fist, now gushing blood. It was broken. It was hardly a wonder. How could a fist ever smash through a hunk of metal? But his drive had been so fierce, it almost seemed impossible. It almost seemed possible. He groaned and wept while clutching his hand toward near the bell. He then braced his legs as if trying to wrestle a great tree, but the bell didn't even budge. Mutsu no longer had the vigor to bring about a miracle. All that was left was the futile struggling of a feeble man who had exhausted everything he had. Why are you all just standing there? Kill him. We don't know what he'll do if he lives. Mutsu once again screamed, but it possessed none of the gallant spirit of before. Merely the sorrowful howl of a wounded wolf. Mutsu started staggering away. The men cleared a path. The mayor had ordered them to kill him, but Mutsu's soul was already dead. Even if only faintly, the men pitied the pathetic sight of a man who had failed to save his beloved.
Mutsu! 次に姿を見せるときは容赦なく撃つぞ。
See, Suzunome, you should have never made a deal with this bastard. Mutsu, the next time you show your face in these parts, you will be shown no mercy.
どこへとも失せてのたれ死に死ぬがいい。
Be gone. May you die like a dog. Can we please get rid of this guy somehow? If I want him to reincarnate so they can off him somehow. May you die like a dog. Mutsu didn't respond. Maybe he hadn't even heard him. He just continued weeping as he disappeared down the mountain path, racking with despair. That was the last time the villagers ever saw Mutsu. After 3 days and 3 nights passed, the bell was moved aside, revealing the pitiful state of the sacrifice. Her eyes were dim and unfocused, truly as though she transformed into a cursed puppet that only existed to breathe. From that day onward, Suzunome drifted through the sea of nightmares and reality. Having lost all her spiritual defenses, she was like a bonfire on a cold, dark night for evil spirits. Seeking fresh warmth, they swarmed her one after another, subjecting her soul to a chain of grief, suffering, envy, and anger. No one apart from her could ever understand what sort of terrifying hell tormented Suzunome. To them, it just looked like she was merely spacing out.
よいか、みな。
Let me yours, everybody.
この女子に我らの村の呪いがすべて封じ込められておる。
The curse of our village has been sealed into her.
もしこの女子の身に何かがあれば、呪いは再び解き放たれてしまうのじゃ。
Should something happen to Suzunome, the curse will be released once more.
ムツが奪いに来るやもしれん。
Mutsu may try to steal her away.
悲観して二人して心中などされたらたまらぬぞ。
Should they meet again, they may choose to die together rather than live apart.
それだけは何としても避けねばならぬ。
We must keep that from happening, no matter what.
それに突然我に返って受水でもされてはたまらぬのでな。
There is also the possibility she comes to her senses and kills herself. We can't allow that to happen.
牢を作るのじゃ。そこにこやつを閉じ込めておけば安泰というもの。
So if we build a prison and seal her in there, we'll have nothing to fear. The mayor had promised the sacrifice would be treated courteously for the rest of her life. Yet from that day onward, she was treated like a mere criminal. Oh, you knew that would happen. They brought Suzunome to a cave and imprisoned her there. She wasn't allowed to live or die. All she could do was suffer from the nightmares until the end of her days. No one repaid her for her sacrifice. Instead, they acted like she was a pariah. This was the start of their 1,000-year living hell. Suzunome slowly rose to her feet in the dark cave. Her eyes shone just like those of the sacred deer.
人にめ、こしゃくなことを。
Impertinent man demons.
すすだきの秘術にて我を封じるとは。
How
どこまでもこしゃくな。
how impudent you are to have sealed me with your ritual.
だが、人の子の術など永遠に続きはせぬ。
But this spell won't last forever. The spell required each generation to birth a child as a sacrifice to pass the curse soot onto. But the divine curse knew that the spell wasn't perfect.
いいだろう。人にどもよ。
Very well, man demons.
この女子に子を産ませ、その子にまた子を産ませ、飽きるまで代々を繰り返すがよい。
You're welcome to let this girl have a child and repeat the cycle for generations until you finally tire out.
だが、そなたらは忘れているのではないか。人の子は一人では子を作れぬことを。
But have you forgotten? No child of man can conceive new life on its own. During the age of the gods, all the land was governed by those divine beings. The children of man had crept into them and eventually taken all the regions for themselves. Most of the lenient gods had accepted this as the start of a new age and conceded the land to the children of men. But not all the gods were in accord. Their rage turned into cursed soot that erupted from their sacred mountains and rained across the nation, signaling the end of the age of the gods. As a result, all children of men from then on out were born with a speck of cursed soot in them. That was mankind's original sin, taking the god's country for their own.
すすだきの生贄の子にはその両親のすすがすべて受け継がれる。
A child of the sacrifice will inherit both of its parents' soot.
すなわち生贄と夫婦になった者のすすを代々取り込み続け、我はどこまでも肥大し続けるのだ。
In other words, I will take in the soot of the new sacrifice and their mate and grow stronger with each passing generation.
やがて膨れ上がった膨大なすすにすすだきの秘術は破れ、我は解放されるだろう。
And once I've gathered enough soot, the spell will be broken and I shall be free once more.
その時こそが録神彦の御の呪いが下される時。
Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto's curse will be unleashed at that very moment.
我こそは録神彦の御の呪いなり、愚かなりし人にどもめ。
I'm the manifestation of Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto's curse. Foolish man demon.
しばしの間はこの体におとなしく封じられていようぞ。
I may lay dormant in this body for a short while.
しかしこれより幾百年をかけて我はさらなるすすを集め、その怒りを呪いをはるかに高める。
Noroimo. But I shall continue to gather soot in the centuries to come, and with it my curse shall grow stronger than before.
そしてこの身に蓄えうる最大限のすすを宿らせしとき、
And then, once the body is unable to contain the soot any longer,
山はうめき、大地はおののき、灼熱の炎がすべてを焼き尽くす。この世の地獄を顕現させようぞ。
the mountains will weep, the earth will tremble, and all will be reduced to ash. I shall bring true hell to the world.
それでこそ兄上様たちの悲しみを癒せるというもの。
And in doing so, my siblings may finally rest in peace.
"兄上様、必ずやこの上なき地獄の権限をお約束いたしまする。
Brother, I swear to show these man-demons a hell like none other. A child of man's scale of time was nothing but a drop in the bucket compared to the span of a divine curse. The curse would last for centuries, until it could expand no further. The foolish children of men thought they had sealed the curse away with their ritual, but in reality it was merely incubating in the sacrifice until it was ready to hatch.
しばしの別れだ、人にどもよ。
Farewell for now, man-demons.
次に我が目覚めるとき、この地に恐るべき災いをもたらすことを約束しようぞ。
I swear when I awake, I shall bring a terrifying calamity to this land. I heard the cave's lattice door creak open. Someone was probably bringing me food. Since I spent nearly the entire day plagued by hauntings, it was rare that I was conscious for when meals arrived. Normally I'd just come to, only to find the food already there. That was the living hell that I, the sacrifice, was subjected to. Meals were the only ordinary part of my life. They probably felt they couldn't afford to let me do anything else on the off chance I fell ill. However, something felt different about the person bringing the food this day. I could tell they were holding their breath and treading carefully. Who was it? When I saw him, I gasped.
松。
静かに。
Shh, be quiet. My legs had withered and atrophied, but I managed to stagger to my feet. Mutsu dashed over and helped me up.
遅くなって。
Sorry I'm late.
いいの。来てくれて
Don't be. Thanks for
あり
coming.
がとう。
For coming for me. I buried my face in his chest and wept for a while. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was too late. There was no way to rid my body of the cursed soot, no way to save me from the world of nightmares. And yet he'd come for me. And there were occasions where I awakened from the hauntings. What bliss it was that Mutsu had come at such a time.
行こう。交代の見張りがいつ来るかもわからない。
Let's go. I don't know when the next guard will take watch.
私のために 無茶をしてくれたのですね。
I can't believe you would do something so reckless for me.
君のためなら大したことじゃないさ。
Nothing's reckless when it's for you.
さあ行こう。歩ける。
Come on, let's go. Can you walk?
はい。
I started walking with Mutsu guiding me by the hand. The door of the cave was wide open. I never believed I'd leave there alive. The sunlight was blinding. I couldn't keep my eyes open, but I could feel the fresh air against my skin. The scent of nature brought back memories.
目がくらんで。
I can't see.
かわいそうに。
もう大丈夫です。
You've been in the dark for too long. I'm alright now. Once I opened my eyes, the sight long since flooded into me. What I found was not the outdoors, but rather a stone room. What? Oh no. All my blood went cold at the air-splitting scream of agony. The room was was slimy. A naked man was hanging upside down from the ceiling. His face was stained in blood. What?
松。
Then who was holding my hand? I turned around in horror to discover the man next to me was no longer Mutsu. That uncanny figure was the shirtless, muscular, tall man wearing a hemp cloth around his face. That wasn't Mutsu. That wasn't Mutsu at all. Then who was he?
離して。離して。
I tried shaking him off me, but his grip was like a vice. He grabbed me from behind, leaving me unable to move. He held my jaw in place, preventing me from turning my head. At that moment, I finally comprehended the repulsive sight before my eyes. Mutsu was naked and hanging upside down from the ceiling. His legs were strung wide open. The other man took a saw, approached his exposed groin and sawed through his pelvis from his thighs upward. Ugh. Sickening drone of thick pelvic bone being cleaved through like logs screamed through the room. Mutsu shrieked his way with each crunch of the bone. I could no longer look away. The man was keeping a firm grip on my jaw, so I'd be forced to watch. Eventually, Mutsu's pelvis was split cleanly in two, and his thighs spread farther than I believed possible. The man continued sawing away, and before long, Mutsu's guts came pouring into a convulsing pile. Even so, Mutsu still wasn't dead. He vomited, and blood continued his chilling screams.
松。松。
Ugh. What a horrible end for Mutsu. Another nightmare. I could no longer tell dream from reality. It seemed like I'd regained consciousness for real this time, but this had to be the start of yet another nightmare, I was sure of it. Couldn't allow myself to hope for Mutsu's arrival ever again. If I did, the evil spirits would just prey on that and continue to show me these sorts of gruesome nightmares. Besides, this was probably the beginning of a new nightmare anyway. I couldn't let my guard down and assumed I'd return to reality. In fact, a new nightmare was just beginning. I heard several people approaching. The door creaked open and 3 of the watchmen appeared. I knew all too well how this particular nightmare went.
意識がある時の方が格段に良いからの。
And this is not a nightmare, this is reality. So these men, I mean, she has to pass on her bloodline, right?
なあ、本当に大丈夫なのか？
Hey, she's awake for this. Hey, is this really alright?
こんな女、触れただけで呪いがこっちに移ってしまいそうじゃ。
I get the feeling we'd catch her curse just by touching her.
その心配はない。安心せえ。肝っ玉の小さいやつじゃ。
Relax, that won't happen. Grow up here. They surrounded me with vulgar smiles. It was the same nightmare.
生贄は短命。何年も生きられんのじゃ。
The sacrifice doesn't have long to live, I'd say.
だから死ぬ前に赤子にすすを引き継がねばならぬ。
She has to pass on the soot before she dies. Being a watchman has its perks, huh? This had to be the same nightmare. So long as I hardened my heart, I'd wake up from it eventually. The stench of men's sweat and rotten breath tormented me. Autumn arrived. With it came a modest harvest, and the village finally obtained the hope of escaping the famine. By this point, some villagers had even forgot all about the cursed soot that had rained down on the village. But the mayor and the elders were convinced of the undeniable existence of Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto's curse. They'd only had a single day to prepare the sacrifice ritual. Because of that, they'd focused on gathering the soot where it lay thickest, and had failed to remove it in several places. Those locations underwent visible change. According to ancient writings, it was said the I didn't mean to skip to that. It was said the Akebia vines laughed that first autumn. A village girl who'd gone to the forest on the outskirts of the village to reap the autumn harvest discovered a clump of Akebia vines. The writings claim that when she reached for the vines, they all laughed at the same time. Furthermore, they went on to say that one of them bit off part of the girl's left earlobe. Yet another writing mentioned bats who could speak in human tongue, settling on the mountain. They threw slander at the children, playing in the mountains, and led them astray with familiar whispers. Late at night, they would come to the village and disrupt the villagers' slumber with their voices. These depictions were too fantastical to be anything but figurative. Yet Hinagata believed that literal monsters had truly arisen. The cursed soot robbed one of their spiritual defenses. Put simply, it made them easy targets for evil spirits. It was likely the plants and animals born in the area where soot remained had been possessed by such spirits and become monsters. Afterwards, the forest they lived in was burnt to the ground, and all the monsters were exterminated. Excuse me. So the forest was burnt to the ground, all the monsters exterminated. However, with that, the villagers understood exactly where the soot's curse was. They learned that if the sacrifice died and the seal were broken, if the sacrifice died and the seal were broken, then the soot would unleash an abomination beyond their wildest dreams on the town. Suzunome withered away day after day. There were many days where she never woke up at all. If she starved to death, then the seal would be broken. Thus, she had to have a child and pass the curse onto it. At this point, Suzunome was already with child. Nobody cared who the father was. Then winter came, followed by spring. Suzunome gave birth to a baby girl, and immediately afterward, Suzunome died. Almost as though her newborn daughter had absorbed both her curse and her life. Her labor was difficult to the bitter end. Her body was subjected to every sort of agony possible. Upon her death, her face was warped with anguish like a hideous demon's. Her daughter was adorable, the very spitting image of her mother, so much so that her wet nurses doubted she was truly cursed. But once she turned 7, the hauntings began. She lost herself and wasted away all traces of her former loveliness, all but a memory. Like her mother, the girl's treatment changed to that befitting of a cursed sacrifice, and once she came of age, the men of the village used her as their plaything. She was impregnated, so the curse could be passed on, and as soon as she had her baby, she passed away. Strangely enough, the child was always a girl, and she would always grow up to be the spitting image of Suzunome. Writings by the Kurakami's ancestors suggested that Suzunome, the first sacrifice, was reincarnated into the child of each following generation. If that were indeed the truth, it was a fate far too cruel. She would blossom until she came of age, was violated, forced to suffer agony unimaginable in labor, until she finally birthed her daughter and died. That was her eternal curse. That was the living hell from which Suzunome had no escape. Though the ancestors of the Kurakamis did it to protect the village from the curse, the black arts they resorted to were horrifying. However, once fate's gears were in motion, they couldn't be stopped. In order to keep the soot from covering the land, Suzunome and her descendants had to endure an eternal hell of endless suffering. Around the early 17th century or so, the sacrifice's condition suddenly changed. Something about her was clearly wrong compared to all the others depicted in the Kurakami records. She would grip her swollen stomach as she foamed from the mouth, begging someone to kill her.
腹の中で巨大な石がゴロゴロと転がり続ける痛みなど聞いたことがありませぬ。
Never before have I heard of a pain like a boulder rolling around in one's stomach.
おそらく人の病気ではありますまい。
This is likely not a human ailment.
このあざの黒さはまさにすすの色。
These bruises are as black as soot.
恐ろしや。六神彦のMikotoの呪いは時代を経てますますに強くなっているというのか。
It can't be. Does that mean Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto's curse has been growing stronger throughout the ages? The hauntings had grown out of control, and there were ominous soot-colored bruises swelling over the girl's abdomen. The two men looked at the tome of black arts they'd stolen from Suzunome when she was sacrificed. When they did, they hypothesized that the soot had grown with each generation and was now about to reach its limit. If this kept up, the soot would grow far too powerful for the sacrifice to bear, and it would burst out of her. The girl was facing hellish anguish from the swollen soot, seeking to explode out of her. It hurts. Kill me, kill me.
それはできぬ。
We cannot. The girl desperately sought release from her living hell, but the family coldly denied her that mercy.
その腹の子を産み、呪いを引き継ぐのがお前の役目。
Your fate is to pass that curse on to the child in your womb.
出産まであと2月。耐えるのだ。
Endure it. Once you do, you may join your mother in peace. Once you have your child, you'll be released from your suffering. Those are the words each family had said to each sacrifice every generation. Of course, they all knew just how agonizing her end would be.
古文書で過去の生贄たちの様子を見る限り、
Judging from the previous records of the sacrifices,
呪いのすすは世代を重ねるごとに増えるのでしょうな。
the cursed soot appears to have been growing in the sacrifice with each successive generation.
このまま赤子を産んでも、今以上のすすを引き継ぐことになるわけか。
So if she's to have a child, it will inherit a soot far stronger than hers.
こやつとて、子を産める年まで持たせるのにどれほど苦労したか。
This girl has already suffered unimaginable pain.
下手をすれば、次の子は子を産む前に死んでしまうやもしれぬ。
In the worst case scenario, her daughter may die before she can bear a child at all.
そのようなことがあれば、この地に大いなる災いが起こる。それだけは許されぬのだ。
If she dies, the land will be faced with a calamity most infernal. We cannot allow for this. Save me, Mutsu.
見つけたぞ。これならなんとかなるかもしれぬ。
I found it. This may work. The curse wasn't the only thing the Kurakami family had inherited over the centuries. There was also the Black Arts tome taken from Suzunome. In it, the head discovered a certain spell.
汚れた赤子を身ごもったとき、その汚れを薄めることができる術だ。
With this spell, we can ease the effects of the curse on an unborn child.
腹の中の胎児を増やし、それぞれに汚れを分けることで薄めることができるという。
With this spell, it will split the fetus in 4, thus weakening the corpse.
なんと、つまり双子を産ませる術というわけですか。
I didn't say that last line right at all. This spell will create more fetuses in the womb and spread the corruption amongst them, thus weakening the curse. My goodness, it's a spell that produces twins, actually quintuplets.
生贄の数を増やすことになるが、背を腹には変えられぬ。
It will increase the number of sacrifices, but that's a price we'll have to pay.
この術で、こやつの腹の中の子を増やしてすすを分け薄めるのだ。
With this, her womb will fill with more children. The soot will disperse amongst the children, diminishing the overall concentration. No one knew for what purpose the original spell had been created. But perhaps those who had devised the soot sailing ritual had foreseen an outcome like this, and thus came up with a countermeasure. This spell was a mockery of life, and yet the head didn't hesitate to use the spell. He waited until the girl reached her final month of pregnancy. Then he placed her on the altar, surrounded by eerie candles. Once he was ready, he recited the ancient cursed words.
双子などと生ぬるいことは言わぬ。
Twins? How short-sighted.
三つ子でも四つ子でも構わぬぞ。多ければ多いほどすすは薄まるのだからな。
I don't care if it's triplets or quadruplets. The more there are, the less soot.
増えよ、増えよ。そして呪いのすすを分け合うがいい。
May your womb be filled with children. Let the cursed soot be split amongst all of them. Her swollen belly distorted from the inside like a bubbling cauldron. Almost like a monster was trying to eat its way out of her. The unfettered pain was too much for the girl to bear, and she finally passed out, foaming at the mouth. The family had continued reciting the cursed words. At that moment, there was a splash of blood, followed by the cries of babies. Heads of several babies burst out of the mother's abdomen. Suffering from agony untold in any era, the girl convulsed and passed away.
やったぞ。やったではないか。
Ah, yes, I did it. One, two, three, four. What a fortune.
5つ子ではないか。
There are 5 of them. Now, would it be Quinn if it's 5? Let me see. I'm wondering if they had somebody unaccounted for. Because, alright, well, I think that's right? If we're counting, you know, who the main ones are, there's Kurakami, Toei, obviously the head of the house. And then there's, I'm gonna see if I can remember all the names. There's Riria, Minobe, the fantasy chick, Subo, I'm gonna get her name wrong, Kiko, Subakiko, the teacher, Miss Hinagata? Does she count as one? Because if she counts as one, that'd be 5. The eternal hell would never end. She would be kept alive in it until the end of time, all in order to keep the curse sealed. But she accepted her fate. For her, eternal suffering meant preventing a calamity. She believed by doing so she was protecting the happiness of many. Not too long ago, there was a fire at the Kurakami household. I hear the Tome of Black Arts was lost then. Okay, so some big questions I have, you know, because we're dealing with babies and all this. I feel like they're gonna talk about this later. What happened to Mutsu? Like, we saw that nightmare that was maybe real, where he died. And it's unclear if Mutsu actually got to be with Suzunome for any period of time. He may have been caught and captured and killed. We don't know if that was a nightmare or if that was reality. I'm going to assume it was real, that he did die like that, that suffering. But Suzunome, in her mind, she's trying to write everything off as a nightmare. But even so, that Mutsu is clearly the ancestor of our main character, you know, Suzumu. So, what happened to Mutsu? Did Mutsu have a baby with somebody else? Did Kurakami... Kurakami had a girl. Kurakami did not have a boy. So, who had Mutsu's ancestors? Who were they, and how did Mutsu have them? Did he meet another woman, like, that was, like, sweet and kind, like Kurakami or something? I don't know. Not too long back, there was a fire at the Kurakami home. I hear they lost the tome then. Though the curse was sealed, it was also the cause of the sacrifices of growing suffering. For some reason, Suzumu felt like the loss of that tome had been another form of divine punishment, albeit mild and belated. Which means we can't use the quintuplet spell again. Nobody would want to use that again anyway, because Toei would die horribly. But even so, what would happen? What's the worst that could happen? Somebody dies, and the land surrounding the mountain that Rokugamihiko was in gets covered in soot. The soot creates monsters in the land? Like, they could seal off the land. Like, in the modern day, you could seal this off. A little bit, you know, at least a little bit. I don't think it would be that big a deal. Suck the soot up with a vacuum. put it somewhere. And just, like, put it in a vacuum seal. What's the worst that could happen? The cursed soot festers with each generation, so eventually the spell will be unable to contain it once more. And the time might not be far off. Oops, sorry.
トエちゃんはお腹の中に大きな石がいくつも転がるような違和感を覚えると言っている。
Toei's mentioned feeling like there are multiple boulders rolling in her stomach. You don't mean...
おそらくは破綻の兆し。
Yes, it may be a sign that the spell is all but broken.
5つ子の邪法が失われた以上、もう生贄からすすを減らす術は存在しない。
And now that the quintuplet spell has been lost, there is no longer any way to mitigate the soot within the
で
sacrifice.
きることは、すすをこれ以上一粒たりとも増やさぬことだけ。
All they can really do is try to prevent any more soot from gathering.
黒髪家は考えたの。ひょっとしたら父親からすすを取り込んでいるのではないか。
The Kurikamis have a theory that the additional soot is taken in from the father.
それで言い名付けを。
And that's why they needed the fiancé.
察しがいいわね。そういうこと。
You catch on quick, that's right.
トエちゃんには相手の持つすすが見えるらしいの。
It seems Toei can sense what soot others carry within them. I finally understand why Toei was engaged. She had been looking for someone without any soot in order to keep the soot within her from growing. And finally, she found somebody in Shokaminuma. The soot within her was already reaching its limit, so she needed a fiancé without a single speck of soot. Virtually everyone was born with a speck of soot or two in them. Someone completely free of the soot was 1 in a million.
亀沼くんの素行は黒髪家もよく知ってるわ。
The Kurikamis are fully aware of what kind of man Kaminuma is.
でも他に代わりがいないの。だから知ってて目をつむるほかはない。
But they don't have any other options. All they can do is let it slide. But she didn't even have the freedom to love who she wanted to. She was kept alive only to marry a man she didn't love, so she could pass the curse she carried within her down to the child, unable to bask in the joys of adolescence.
戦後からは人権意識の高まりもあり、黒髪家の歴代当主はかなり良識的になったわ。
Generally speaking, public awareness of human rights rose after the war, and as a result, the subsequent heads of the Kurakami family have been much kinder.
生贄ではなく娘として扱うようになった。
They do treat their children not as sacrifices but as daughters.
トエちゃんにもせめて人並みの人生を感じてもらえるよう学校にも行かせてる。
Toei's father let his child go to school because he wanted her to experience a normal life.
早ければ20歳を迎える前には出産しなければならないもの。
Though she has to have a child before she turns 20 by the earliest.
ほとんどのケースで出産時に生贄は死亡する。
In most cases, the sacrifice died in childbirth.
彼女の命はあと数年もないのよ。
So she has only a handful of years left to live.
でもそれで苦しみが終わるわけじゃない。
But that won't mean the end of the suffering.
また新しい命に新しい苦しみが始まる。
The suffering will just start all over again with a new life.
そうね。
That's right.
トエちゃんは1000年間もずっと苦しみ続けているのかもしれない。
Toei may have been suffering for the last 1,000 years.
初めは自分の霊障の正体を探るための研究だった。
At first, I began my research to find out what my hauntings truly were.
でも今は トエちゃんを救ってあげられないかという気持ちが一番なの。
But the thing I really want to know now is how to save Toei.
録画美彦の御の呪いをなんとか終わらせたい。
I want to find a way to put an end to Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto's curse.
彼女と彼女たちはもう1000年も苦しんだわ。
They've suffered for 1,000
もういい加減
years.
録画美様も許してくれてもいいんじゃないかしら。
I wonder if there's no way for the dear God to forgive them.
神様の気持ちを考えるときっと
I think that would
複
be
雑だと思います。
complicated.
だって神様は黒神さんたちを呪いたかったわけじゃない。
I mean, it wasn't like Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto wanted to curse Kurakami and the others.
でもどうやったら許してくれるのか
But as for how they could be forgiven,
僕には想像もつきません。
I can't think of a single thing.
私もよ。
Same here.
でもいくら神様でもトエちゃんをこれ以上苦しめていい理由なんてないと思うわ。
But I don't care who's doing it. There's no reason Toei should have to suffer any longer.
そうね。これは怒りだわ。
That's right. That's what makes me so angry.
理不尽な呪いでトエちゃんたちを代々苦しめてきた録画美彦の御への私の怒り。
Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto should never have forced Toei and all those before her to suffer with this unjust curse.
私だって若い時は霊障ですっごい苦しめられたんだから。もう二度とあんなのはごめんよ。
I know how hard it is. When I was young, my hauntings were devastating. I don't want to go through that ever again.
見つけたいです。呪いを解く方法。
I want to find a way to break the curse.
先生には知識がある。そして僕には力がある。
We have your knowledge and my power.
僕も先生とは違った角度からきっとそれを見つける手伝いができると思います。
I think I can help us find it from another angle. I didn't know how, but I believed if I continued training and could pass some sort of threshold, I could obtain my power.
今日はこんな時間まで付き合ってくれてありがとう。
Thanks for sticking around with me for so long.
長い話を延々と聞かされて疲れちゃったでしょ。
You must be tired from all this chatting.
本音はまだちょっと呆然としてます。
Honestly, I'm still a little surprised.
そうよね。
I bet.
先生、ちょっとお腹が空いちゃった。あんみつでも食べていかない？
I'm kinda hungry. You wanna grab a bite with me?
いえ、もうちょっと神社を散策したい気持ちです。
No thanks. I actually want to explore Shrine a little more.
わかったわ。
Okay, got it.
では失礼します。
If you'll excuse me then.
また学校で
See
シャチ
it's
運ぶでね。
see you at school. I wonder whose route this is. Is this her route or is this the final route? Is this the penultimate route? I don't know. Is this his route? Mutsu/Suzunome route? I said goodbye to Miss Hinagata and returned to the shrine grounds. Of course, it's true that I was stunned by such an outlandish story. But apart from that, I felt like I'd gone on a 1,000-year-long trip for some reason. Like I'd just left the theater after watching a very long movie. I wanted to be alone so I could get my feelings sorted out. I felt like I was still in the movie. Everyone had times where they've empathized too much and felt like they'd become the protagonist. But even after returning to reality, I still felt that way. In fact, I felt more like I'd finally remembered something I'd forgotten for many years. It was a strange feeling, one I'd never experienced before, and I just couldn't get rid of it. I returned to the Doll Memorial Hall. Though the main shrine was constantly full of people, this place was always desolate. I felt as though this place was far removed from reality. I think I went there because I didn't want to go back to reality until I'd sorted out my feelings. Or maybe I was just guided there. She was waiting in the Doll Memorial entrance.
すず。
I tried to say Kurakami, but my mouth said Suzu instead. Who was Suzu? I was mixing her up with someone with a similar name. But I didn't know anyone called that. She smiled wryly when she saw even I was taken aback.
千年押すのこのこと。今頃来たか、ムツ。
You're 1,000 years too late. You have quite the gall to show up after all this time, Mutsu. I didn't understand what Kurakami was saying. But though her words were venomous, she also seemed a little happy too.
僕が必ず君を救うから。
I swear I'll save you.
理由はわからないけれど、それが僕の使命なんだ。
Honestly, okay, so this is the confusing part. This is Toei Kurakami. Toei Kurakami is a new person. But she's also Suzunome from 1,000 years ago. But she's also the curse, the entity of the curse, which is Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto. So she has 3 personalities? I don't know. Or is it only 2? It's Suzunome, reborn, and, you know, she just forgets some of her memory, and Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto. And ostensibly, Toei Kurakami is just a name that they put on Suzunome? I don't know. I don't know why, but it's my duty.
千年遅い。
You're 1,000 years too late.
盆栽に拳を砕いて泣き寝入りしたお前に、今さら何ができる？
What could you possibly do now, you who gave up after breaking his fist on a bell?
だが、それを笑う気はない。1000年を経て、ようやく我が呪いは完全に熟した。
No, really, I don't intend to mock you. My curse is finally ripe after 1,000 years.
その最後に、すすの村の血を最も強く受け継ぐお前がこうして現れるのは、まるで運命かのよう。
It must be fate that one who inherited the blood of that village of soot should show up now at the very end.
お前のすすをもらう。
I shall take your soot.
そして、持てる力のすべてを出し尽くして、この地に災いをもたらすのだ。
And then I shall call forth all my power to bring calamity to the land.
君が、六神様なのか？
Are you the dare god?
わかるのか、陸奥の末裔よ。
So you can see who I am, descendant of Mutsu.
君が呪いたいほどの辛い思いをしてきたことを僕は否定しない。
I won't deny the suffering that brought forth your desire to curse everybody.
でも、
But
それは黒髪さんに向けるべきものでもない。
Kurakami doesn't deserve to take the blame for it.
承知している。この娘には我も同情を禁じ得ない。
I understand. I cannot help but sympathize for this girl either.
だからこそ、この最後の時に。
That is why, precisely at the end of this path,
この娘の悲願を叶えてやりたいと思う。
I wish to grant her dearest wish.
お前に抱かれながら、その役割を終えさせてやるのだ。
It's for you to hold her as her role is brought to its end.
それが黒髪さんの願いならば、
If that's what
僕も
Kurakami,
叶えたい。
if that's what Kurakami wants, then I'll fulfill that wish.
でも、
But
黒髪さんは少なくともまだ
however, I know that right now, at the very least,
まだそれを望んではいないんだ。
that's not what she wants.
なぜお前にそれがわかる？
And how do you know that?
彼女はそれでも僕を拒絶したんだ。
Because otherwise, she would never have pushed me away. I was a descendant of the cursed village of Suda. Though minuscule compared to the descendants of the sacrifice, I should have had much more soot in me than the average person. That was why Kurakami had called me corrupted, and why she couldn't afford to be with me.
僕との再会が彼女の悲願だったとしても、
Even if her greatest wish was to see me again,
彼女は1000年をかけてこの地を守ってきた責任をまだ手放したくはないんだ。
she still didn't want to abandon her responsibility of protecting the land.
もちろん彼女にはいつだってそれを手放す権利があると思う。
Of course, I think she has the right to abandon that duty whenever she wants.
彼女が強いられた理不尽な運命を彼女はいつだって返上していい。
She can sacrifice that or relinquish that unfair fate she was forced into at any time.
でもそれは彼女が決めることで、
But that would be for her to decide,
それを決めるのは僕でもなければ。
not me or you.
この1000年様々な輩を見てきたが、
I've seen many a character these 1,000 years.
お前はやはり特別だ。我が運命の歯車に噛み合うだけの資格がある。
You are truly special. You are worthy to number among the gears of my fate.
君にはこの地を呪うにふさわしい正当な権利があるに違いない。
You have every right to curse the land.
だけれど
But
彼女の気持ちを無視していい権利なんか
you,
ないんだ。
you have no right to disregard Suzunome or Kurakami or Toei's feelings.
不思議な男よ。
You're truly a bizarre man.
お前は我の1000年の悲願の見届け人として使わされた天の使いに違いない。
You must be a messenger of the heavens, sent to bear witness to the fulfillment of my 1,000-year wish.
どのような運命がお前をここへ導いたかは知らぬが、
I know not what twist of fate guided you here, but
人の子ごときにもはや覆せる運命ではない。
no child of man could hope to overturn her destiny. I felt a whirlwind. Falling leaves swirled at her feet, giving her a menacing aura. Next, antlers befitting a deer god slowly sprouted out of her head. I recognized her. This was the image that had come to my mind the whole time I was listening to Miss Hinagata's story.
我は六神彦のMikotoの呪いなり。
I am the curse of Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto.
1000年の眠りより目覚め、今こそこの地に災いをもたらさん。
I have awakened from my 1,000-year slumber, and now I shall bring calamity unto the land.
まだだ。
But not yet.
それは彼女が決める。
That's for Toei to decide.
鈴の目の役目はすでに終わった。
Suzunome's role has already ended.
終わってない。終わらせない。
It hasn't ended yet. I won't let it end.
そうでなかったら
Otherwise,
彼女の1000年の苦しみと悲しみが何の意味も持たなくなる。
her 1,000 years of suffering will have all been for nothing. Though she had been treated like a prisoner, she'd always had one avenue of escape. But she had never chosen death. She could have rejected her food or bit off her tongue. But no matter how hellish her life was, she denied death at every chance. It couldn't have been easy. Over the last 1,000 years, the temptation of dying, of being released from her suffering, should have come to her countless times. A millennium of nightmares offered many more opportunities for it. Perhaps she was resisting the urge to put an end to it all, even at this very moment.
それを耐えて生きてきた1000年間を
She endured all of it, and kept living for 1,000 years.
どう決着するか。それは彼女にだけ許された彼女だけの権利だ。
So for that reason, only she has the right to decide how this ends.
それをお前が奪ったら彼女の1000年には何も残らない。何の意味もない。
If you take that from her, there'll be nothing left of those 1,000 years. It will have all gone to waste. What do I care?
さえずるな、人の米。
Don't preach to me, accursed child. Her eyes glowed scarlet. At that moment, the countless dolls lining the hall collapsed one after another like dominoes. Every cell in my body was overwhelmed by an invisible force.
時は満ちたのだ、小僧。
The time has come, boy.
お前はただこの娘の1000年をねぎらうためだけに使わされたに過ぎぬ。
You were brought here as a reward for her 1,000 years of service.
さえずらず、ただひれ伏して我が運命を受け入れよ。
And only for that. Now cease your prattling. Prostrate yourself before me and play your part in my destiny.
君の運命じゃない。
No, this isn't your destiny.
僕と君があることが運命ならば、それは彼女が決める運命に従う歯車に過ぎない。
If there's any destiny that brought us here, it's hers. As such, the decision falls on her shoulders.
決めるのは彼女だ。僕はそれを守るためにここにある。
She'll decide this for herself. I'm here to defend her right to do that.
何の真似か。
What exactly are you scheming? I lowered my hips and readied my fist. My fist was dedicated to God. I was faced with a god in a catastrophe that should be prevented. There was no better time than now. I had trained myself in the fist for as long as I could remember. It was all for this very moment.
お前の意志の強さを拳に宿しているのだろうとは思う。
You seem to believe that the strength of your will resides in your fist.
だが、それ以上の何かも、それ以下の何かも感じぬ。
But that's all you have. I hated to admit it, but she was right. She had the desire to resist fate, but that was it. I had the desire to resist fate, but that was it. All I had was a flesh and blood fist. It wasn't glowing with some miraculous power that dwelled within.
だが、お前の奉納を受けよう。
But I accept your offering.
1000年を経て木が熟したこの時に、陸奥の末裔がここにある。
Mutsu's descendant is here on the eve of my awakening, after 1,000 years.
お前には報じる資格がある。いいだろう、陸奥。
You have a right to present me an offering, so be it, Mutsu.
この娘のための義憤を拳に込め、存分に我に打ちかかるがよい。
Fill your fists with your righteous indignation for this girl's lot, and strike me as you will.
無駄を知ることになろう。だが、それでよい。
You shall learn of futility, but that as well.
人の子は、無駄を思い知ることなくして死すことを、心残りと呼ぶ。
Children of men refer to the act of dying without realizing their futility, dying with regret.
お前に、それをさせたくはない。
I would not wish that upon you. Every drop of sweat and blood during the training was for this. I put everything I'd accumulated over those years into my fist. It was fated 1,000 years ago that I would be here today. Then I'd ask fate to endow my fist with a miracle to match. I clenched my fist so hard it almost broke.
覇者検証。邪悪を打ち破りて正しきを示す。
Haja Kensho, crush evil and demonstrate the righteous path.
鈴原流親善武術。鈴原鈴
I am Suzuhara Suzumu, a practitioner of the Suzuhara Divine Tribute style.
いざ
Now,
しかと
it is
受け
done.
取ったぞ。お前の奉納を。
I have received your offering, of this I am certain. Tsunome Suzumu's face warped with agony as he fell on his knee. He had certainly punched the god in the abdomen. But his fist had broken. Blood gushed out of his torn skin. The god's body had been too rigid and cold, like it was made of metal, specifically bronze. The crimson pearls dipped to the ground and scattered at his feet like red flowers.
哀れな男よ。
Pitiful man.
お前の1000年はもう一度無力さを思い出すためのものだったというのか。
So this is the end of your 1,000-year journey? A pitiful reminder of your powerlessness. It can't be.
しかとお前の奉納を受け取ったぞ。
I have received your offering.
なぜ涙を流す？もう泣く必要はない。
Why shed tears? You need not weep any longer.
お前たちはこれより添い遂げる。
For now you two can be together.
我が運命の中で1000年ぶりの再会を噛みしめ合うがよい。
Savor your 1,000-year reunion together, between the grinding gears of my fate. What? She spread her hands and gently wrapped them around Suzumu's. almost like she was comforting a wailing infant. Suzumu's tears were not of pain, merely anger at his own powerlessness, for all his efforts had done nothing to save her. So he lamented his failure. However, those feelings soon drifted into the void. In the god's gentle embrace, warm as a blanket, his regrets melted away. And did he die? Before long, Suzumu's consciousness faded away, as though drifting to sleep. By the time she spread open her hands, Suzumu had vanished into nothingness. Before long, all the lingering affection faded from her face, giving way to an expression truly suitable for a curse.
人にどもよ、刮目するがよい。我は六神彦の命の呪いなり。
Behold your fate, man demons. I am the curse of Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto.
今こそ、この地は報いを受けるとき。神の怒りに震えながら、ひれ伏すがよい。
Today, this land shall suffer its divine retribution. Prostrate yourselves and tremble before the wrath of a god. Those on the shrine's grounds could see her rising into the sky. The divine curse looked down from on high and sneered malevolently.
今こそ、神の復讐の時。
This shall mark the hour of heavenly vengeance. Black clouds filled the air and blotted out the sky as though she were willing them to. The townsfolk could only stop and gape in astonishment. They all saw something black falling from the sky. Snow? Feathers? No, it was judgment. The asphalt, concrete, tiles, and floors were stained black in the blink of an eye. There was a flash of scarlet, and a moment later, flames taller than skyscrapers erupted forth. Dragons of fire spouted over the town one after the other. The flames licked the streets as though they had a mind of their own, and engulfed the streets in succession. Swallowed by the hellfire, the townsfolk writhed as they succumbed to their agony. Yet the cursed flames would not allow them to die until they scorched charcoal. The townsfolk suffered the fires of hell until they were no longer recognizable as human beings. The high-rise buildings were devoured by fire one after the other. People scrambled and leapt from their windows, though few made it that far. Screams mixed with the howl of scorching winds, like the roar of the sea. The manifestation of the curse listened with a faint smile, but before long she cast her eyes down and shook her head slightly. Did this disaster wrench her heart too? It's not enough.
この程度の災いではまるで足らぬ。
A calamity like this is hardly enough.
兄上様の嘆きを慰むにはまるで足らぬ足らぬ足らぬ足らぬ。
This is hardly enough to ease brother's lament. Not enough, not enough.
もっとすすを集めねば。
I need more soot.
もっとすすを集め、もっと壮絶なる災いを。
I need far more soot to bring about a far grander calamity.
兄上様に捧げるに。
Oh, I must deliver unto brother a scourge more befitting of our sorrow.
兄上様に捧げるにふさわしき災いを。
Even after the sun had set, the flames of the divine curse blazed ever fiercely. The likes of the children of men were powerless to put a stop to it. All they could do was wait for the wrath of the divine to subside, just like in the days of yore. The two looked down upon that scene from a rift in the clouds. They had no bodies, but they could feel each other's warmth, signaling that they were together. Since they had no bodies, they had no mouths, and therefore could not speak. However, they could exchange feelings. Both of them were happy to be reunited after 1,000 years, of course. But the heartbreak they felt at the scene before them far outweighed that. She had fought for 1,000 years to keep this hell from breaking loose, and yet this conclusion spat in the face of her struggle. Unable to bask in their joy, the pair could do nothing but silently behold the hell unfolding below them. He was bitter. Suzumu's heart gradually filled with frustration. He hated himself for being too weak to prevent this conclusion that saddened her so. Don't worry about it, she whispered. We finally met again after 1,000 years. That's good enough for me. But Suzumu couldn't accept it. No, he didn't want to accept it. He absolutely didn't want to acknowledge this end as her salvation. But their time was up. Their emotions gradually melted into a warm slumber. Farewell, Mutsu, Suzuhara. May we meet again in another life. I can't. There's no way I can accept this. Mutsu punched a rock showered by the waterfall. His face was damp with tears and splashes of water. After his exile, Mutsu had tried again to save Suzunome, but the villagers standing guard discovered him and wounded him so badly he'd only barely escaped with his life. And after 3 days, the curse was sealed into Suzunome's body. With that, merely saving her was pointless. He had to find a way to break the curse sealed within her. Afterwards, he had taken up the guise of a traveling monk and traversed the land, looking into spells and hidden arts. But as what he sought to break was a black art, he had been unable to acquire any information at all. The more he investigated, the deeper his despair grew. One day in his travels, he learned that Suzunome had already passed away. Curse this fist! Curse this forsaken fist! If only I had the resolve. If only I had resolve powerful enough to render my arm, no, my whole body asunder. Then perhaps I could have brought about the miracle of breaking that bell. Why? It was the only chance I had. Why couldn't I bring forth the miracle? Mutsu lunged his fist in the moment Suzunome was being sailed into the bell. Back then, he merely punched as his emotions had driven him. But the more time passed, the more Mutsu had become bitterly aware that he lost his only chance. A human fist couldn't possibly break through a temple bell. However, had he managed to bring about a miracle, he could have saved Suzunome. Mutsu wept as he punched the cliff behind the waterfall over and over again. I want a miracle, even if it means sacrificing my own body. Please grant me a miracle to save her. Just then, Mutsu heard a voice from heaven. Your lament has reached my ears. What? I am Rokugamihiko-no-Mikoto. You're the one that made the curse. It was a young and composed male voice. Mutsu looked to the heavens, ignoring the waterfall pouring on him, and prostrated himself. What is it you desire? I beseech you, bestow unto me a miracle that could break that bell. Certainly a child of man's fist has no hopes of breaking through a temple bell. Then lend me your ears, children of man, Mutsu. From this day onward, temper that fist so it may be stronger and more sublime than any other, and dedicate your fist to me. Train every day, pass your teachings down to your children, have them dedicate their training to me. Once 1,000 years have passed, your descendant of that era will have the miracle that you seek endowed in his fist. 1,000 years? A child of man could do nothing against a god's curse. That was why they had no choice but to rely on such black arts. But even so...
1000年でたったの1000年で
1,000 years? Only 1,000 years?
ありがたやありがたき幸せ
Thank you. You have filled my soul with joy.
1000年の精進この蜜必ずや捧げてみせまする
I, Mutsu, swear to devote myself to you for the next 1,000 years.
そして必ず我が血を引きし者の拳にて神の怒りのすすを払ってみせまする
And I swear the soot of the divine wrath will be swept away by one who inherits my blood. I'm curious who he marries. They probably just won't show, but that'd be kind of interesting. The founding of the Suzuhara Divine Tribute style dates back a millennium. It was said the founder was a traveling monk and a mountain priest. As he was training under a waterfall, he received a divine revelation to dedicate his tempered fist to God. This fist was not for fighting. It is to be dedicated to God. It preaches respecting the laws of honor, revering gods, and one's ancestors, and other spiritual practices. The fist and the mentality were passed on through the generations. And thus, 6 or so centuries passed. Mutsu and Suzunome's names were forgotten, as was the name of the god that fist was dedicated to. But Mutsu's descendants continued devoting themselves to owning their minds and fists. And so for another 4 centuries, bringing us to the present. The Suzuhara Divine Tribute style has been passed down to this day. Its current instructor is Gentaro Suzuhara. He is its 60th instructor since its founding. His son Suzumu has been undergoing intense training since he was a boy, intending to become the 61st instructor. If all of this is true, that would make this the oldest style of martial arts in Japanese history. The Suzuhara Divine Tribute style and its 1,000-year history have been entrusted to a young Suzumu and will likely keep surviving into the future. Furthermore, every New Year's you can see it being practiced publicly on the bell of a temple close to the dojo. This New Year's, Suzumu has sworn to become the art's 1,000-year successor, and he will punch the bell for the first time. From a local community magazine. Okay, I will stop here. I was really curious if they would let us know who his ancestor married. I mean, it's not important. He married some girl, you know? But, I don't know, maybe it could have been somebody who looked like one of the descendants of the Soot or something. I don't know. Or, like, Sho's great-grandmother or something. I don't know. He wouldn't have Soot in him, or he would have Soot in him, of course, if that were the case, but... Oh well. I guess we'll never know. Or maybe there is some notes somewhere that shows what his, ancestors look like. Oh. But next time we will continue this. This will probably be the route where he turns things around. And then hopefully, I have heard that we will go back to the girls, like their routes or whatever. So we might get endings for each of them, I hope. You know, like romantic endings for each of them would be nice. But I guess we'll find out what happens. So see ya next time. Bye.